Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. By now it was already late, and his disciples approached him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it is already late. Dismiss them so that they can go to the surrounding farms and villages and buy themselves something to eat." He said to them in reply, "Give them some food yourselves." But they said to him, "Are we to buy 200 days' wages of food and give it to them to eat?" He asked them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. So he gave the order to have them sit down in groups on the green grass. The people took their place in rows by hundreds and by 50s. Then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing, broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 12 wicker baskets full of fragments, and what was left of the fish. Those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. The Gospel of the Lord. When St. John is speaking of love, he is speaking of love not as a mere feeling, but a very concrete act. A concrete act of Jesus dying on the cross, where God shows us that true love is about placing the needs of the beloved first, which he does. And it says, he loved us first. We can't love without him loving us. And so he presents to us this image on the cross of the truth of love, that it is a love that pours out the self for the sake of the other. And one of the things that can make that happen for us, one of the gifts that God gave us is, of course, our emotions. We're not always good at controlling them, but our emotions tell us something. I like to say that they're the nervous system of your soul, which tells you that something needs to be done, a response on your part. And so Jesus' first response in his humanity to seeing this crowd, his first response is compassion. It's a facet of love. He has a feeling for the needs of these people. On the other hand, the disciples are practical. And sometimes that's where we can lose the gift of what our emotions do. Sometimes we can lose them in practicalities. And so Jesus, moved with pity and compassion, he says, get them something to eat. And immediately the disciples think of what they can't do instead of what they can do. Excuse upon excuse. And sometimes that happens when it comes time to being compassionate to people, to others. We think of all the things that we shouldn't do. I might have mentioned this before. I think I did. But there's when I was in high school and going to CCD, it was popular to play this particular movie called The Cipher in the Snow. You can find it on YouTube. It was done in the 70s. The word cipher is spelled C-I-P-H-A-R. And it's defined like this. It says, a person of no influence. That's what a cipher is. That's one of the definitions. Or, interesting, the other thing the dictionary says is a non-person. Wow. That's when somebody is there and nobody really cares. Nobody pays attention. Nobody has a feeling for them. Or they allow their rationale, their reason, to make every excuse not to have an encounter which an emotion is calling them to do, because God can indeed work that way. There's no pity. There's just a blank stare. Anyways, this little boy, he dies. The movie begins by him getting off of a school bus and dropping dead in the snow. He died of being ignored. He died of having no attention. It's interesting that at this time of the year, there's an extremely high rate of suicide that goes along with this time of the year. Because where everybody is feeling great joy, there are some who are not feeling anything at all, especially from people who should be caring. It's a marvelous thing that we have our students from Holy Family here present. It's a marvelous thing that you're here, and so I can say that the closeness of your school is an opportunity to offer great care to each other. You're not a big school, but you can offer great care to each other. And yet at the same time, because you're a relatively small student body compared to maybe the public schools, someone who is ignored becomes even more obvious. And so this is where our charity comes into play. And so Jesus is inviting the disciples to put some stake in the game. They are not on board with the compassion at this point, but he says, get something for them. In other words, all right, guys, you're not feeling this, okay? What can you do? What can you do to help? And so, we have some bread. It's just a little bit. It doesn't seem to be enough to do the job, but they go back to him and they say, well, this is what we have. All right? And so when I don't think I can do it, or when I don't think I have enough, then I go to Jesus and I say, what should I do? And what can you do to help? And so Jesus blesses, and there's enough for everybody. And for us, when we take the time to minister to the need of another with our effort, and we have this compassion, this pity, this love of Christ to give, then Christ will bless this and multiply it for the good of the community. In a sense, what you also see here is the Eucharist played out to perfection. There's a great desire on God's part to love you, and that love is displayed and put into action in a liturgy where people are organized in groups, and Jesus enters and he feeds you himself, and yet there's all kinds of people involved in presenting the gifts and offering the sacrifice and distributing the Eucharist. This is what we do at the Mass. And so this gospel passage becomes a fantastic, in itself, a living experience where the compassion of God is ministered through the actions of wonderful people, and his love is multiplied in his real presence in the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus in the Eucharist. And in the end, when we say go in peace, it's a commission for all who receive to go out and share what they have received. That is, this pity and this compassion of Christ that has been given to us, body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Regina Celi, letare